Hello, my name is Kevin Howard, and I'm the host of Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Welcome to episode 26, where this week I will focus our conversation on why history matters. Yeah, we're going there. This is a very important conversation because it is really hard to make sense of the world that we're living in if we don't have a solid understanding of how we arrived here. Well, I'd like to start the conversation by having you recall the last time you lost your keys. This always seems to happen to me when I have somewhere to go. Well, okay, so here you are. Everything is ready. You're looking good. You look in the mirror one last time. You head towards the door. You reach to the little plate that has the keys or the little cup holder that has the keys, and boom, no keys. Oh my God, I'm already late. What am I going to do now? Okay, so your mind starts racing and you start looking around in a very haphazard way. Now, if you're like me, this racing around usually doesn't find the keys. It's not until I say, okay, all right, I'm spinning my wheels. What I need to do is slow down for a minute and think. And as soon as I do, now that I'm breathing calmly and slowly, all of a sudden popping into my head the last things I were doing. Okay. And this leads us immediately to breadcrumb number one. To accurately understand the present condition, where's my keys? You must have a good understanding of how you arrived here. Okay, so now I'm back at looking at my keys, looking for my keys. And because I've calmed down, it occurs to me the last time I saw my keys. And when was that? Well, last night when I arrived home, I was wearing a raincoat. So, okay, I go over to the raincoat and voila, there are the keys in the pocket of the raincoat that I took off because it needed to dry. And I forgot that I put the keys in the pocket and didn't put them in the little dish by the door like I always do. And therefore, I lost my keys. Okay. It's a simple analogy. It's one that taps into our shared experience because this is how we help each other make sense of things. So, taking the wisdom from that basic reality that, yeah, we wind up in a spot. We got to go. We got to get the keys. The keys are not where they normally are. We need to figure out how to find them. We don't find them until we remember where we left them last. Okay. Well, you can apply, and that's the point of this podcast, why history matters. You could apply the logic of that lived experience to the reality that we face every day. So I call on you now to move away from where I left my keys to the full range of bizarre events that are impacting our lives today. And what are they? We are living in an economy in rapid decline. Yeah, no matter where you fit in that economy, you can't avoid the realities that I'm talking about right here. First and foremost, all essential goods and services, all the stuff we need, food, shelter, medical supplies, healthcare, education, to get the skills to be competitive. Oh, everything that we need is really expensive, more expensive than the growth of our personal incomes. Yeah, that's most of us. Okay. Beyond that, talking about our personal income, what is happening to jobs in America? Unemployment over the last 14 months, and it did not start with Donald Trump, because the same trend occurred in the last year of Joe Biden. Unemployment has been going up materially. We laid off more people in January than have been laid off in any month in the United States since the end of the Great Recession in 2009. Yeah. Okay. There was a recent report amongst the restaurant industry that every one of the major fast food restaurants and some of the family dining restaurants are closing massive portions of their available locations in the United States. I mean, pick a name, any name, KFC, Wendy's, or whatever. Go look it up. You'll see what is happening to jobs in America, which is how we make our money, which is how we can afford to buy these very expensive and essential goods and services. Another stressor. And back to the housing affordability crisis. Yes, I've talked about this, and yes, I will continue to talk about this, and I need to beat the drum on this because this is what is most impacting millions and millions of Americans. Why? Because the price of housing has moved out of the range for the median middle class household to buy a house. And because their incomes are higher than typical renters, because they used to be able to buy a house, their higher incomes are driving up rents. So rent inflation is becoming a thing that lower income families who don't make middle class incomes are having to choose between rent and how much they eat. And they're showing they'd rather have shelter and eat less. So food insecurity is a major problem in America for people who earn 200% of the federal poverty level. For a family of three, that's $55,000 a year. That's many, many families. Oh, by the way, that's 116 million Americans. For those people, 52% of them, according to the Urban Institute, are reporting that they are experiencing food insecurity. And the number one driver of that is rent inflation, not even food inflation. Yeah, rent inflation is driving food insecurity more than food inflation. Okay, so this is the economy in which we live, where jobs are falling off the cliff, the price of everything we need is going through the roof, and now we're down to deciding between whether we want shelter or how much we're going to eat. Okay, major stressor. How the hell did we get here? Okay. But if that's not bad enough, here we go again at war somewhere in the world. This time, the United States and their battle buddy, Israel, has attacked Iran. We are in a war in Iran. And yes, a couple of episodes I talked extensively about this war. The point is, how is that affecting us? What is affecting us about the war in Iran is Iran has shut down the Straits of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz is important because this is a little waterway that's along the coast of Iran that 20% of the world's oil and natural gas pass through. That has been shut off. And now when you and I go down to the gas station, we're now paying $5 plus a gallon. There's no end in sight in this war, which means that the shortages of gasoline and natural gas are going to get worse. We're not stopping at $5 a gallon, but it's already bad. And humming in the background, while we are being smothered by the economy in which we live, while our gas pumps are blowing up because of a stupid war in Iran, Israel is humming away there, continuing to slaughter Palestinians, violating the ceasefire agreement. Yeah, they're doing that. They continue slow drip of slaughtering more innocent civilians in Gaza. And they've extended that reach to the West Bank, where they've picked up the murders there too. So all these things are going on at the same time. How do we make sense? Any of this. But all of them lead us to the thing that affects us when we're down at the supermarket, when we're sitting in traffic, when we're waiting in line. Breadcrumb number two. We now live in the divided states of America. Yeah, forget about the United States. We are the divided states of America. Everything that makes each of us unique has been weaponized to the point where we know who our enemy is, we know who the them is, and they don't deserve shit. If you're a MAGA, it's them libtards. If you're a progressive, it's those deplorables. If you're from the North, it's the South. If you're from the East, it's the West. If you're a man, it's a woman. If you're heterosexual, it's gays and trans. If you're Catholic, oh my God, those evangelicals, right? On and on and on. Okay, we are the divided states of America. And the only way we're going to figure out how we wound up here is if we look at how we got here. Now, I have spent several episodes of Breadcrumbs covering the history that led to the worst wealth and income inequality in America. I've talked about that. The 50-year trend line where extreme wealth has redistributed $50 trillion worth of wealth and income from the bottom 90% of American earners to the top 1% over the last 50 years. Yeah, we've talked about that. We've documented that. The data is comprehensive. Okay, we won't be covering that one here in this episode. 2 episodes ago, I talked about the 70-year history between the United States and Iran that led to this ridiculous, outrageously wrong war against Iran right now. Okay, so we won't get into great detail about that. I have already covered in previous episodes the legal basis of how Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So we won't be going into the details of that. And I've covered how 4 presidential administrations, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, how each of them had wickedly betrayed the electorates who elected them. The people who actually voted for them, they betrayed them. And those betrayals have radicalized the US electorate that led to the election of Donald Trump twice. And I've covered most recently how Donald Trump has now decided to betray the people who elected him. Where that's going to lead, I don't know. But that's how we got here. So those are the major things I've covered historically in Breadcrumbs that relates to the history of how we wound up in this pulp fiction nation. But what I'd like to demonstrate in this conversation is a trend line on something that should be beyond politics, because it had always been beyond politics. And that is federal disaster relief. Yeah, federal disaster relief. What happens, okay, back in the 1930s, when we used to have the Dust Bowl, when drought had destroyed so much of the central of the Midwest, when you had natural disasters and there was no coordinated federal response, what happened is areas got destroyed, capital left, nothing got rebuilt, and what you had is dissolution in its wake. Okay, we learned from those lessons and we developed the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. We are going to be committed to, when a natural disaster occurs here in the United States, anywhere in the United States, we are going to have a national response. That's not going to be based on politics. That's not going to be based on the demographics of the local community. That's not going to be based on the wealth of the local community. We are going to have a federal response because every American deserves to get recovery relief when a natural disaster destroys their life. So I am going to tell you the story of 5 natural disasters that have occurred over the last 34 years. Over the last 34 years, we start with Hurricane Andrew, which occurred in 1992. George H.W. Bush was president when this disaster hit, and it primarily hit in the southeastern United States. Florida, South Carolina, a bit of Georgia. I don't think it went all the way up to North Carolina, but if you're from North Carolina and you remember Hurricane Andrew, put it in the notes. We had actually come up with a new piece of legislation about 3 or 4 months before this disaster actually hit that had kind of revised FEMA. Well, when this disaster hit, it was the system that had been put into place fell apart. It was not working. And we had to fix it because you had tens of thousands of people homes destroyed, millions of dollars. I mean, it was $27 billion worth of damage. This was the largest natural disaster in U.S. history at that point. So it started off really badly because the system that we put in place wasn't working effectively. We weren't getting disaster relief to the people quickly. And so Congress went to work. And in a bipartisan effort, Congress decided, oh no, this is still the United States of America. We're not letting this go down like this. And they put together a legislative package that exceeded what George Bush had asked for by like $9 billion. And they revised the FEMA program and created a new system of disaster relief and then started flooding that zone. Okay. Because it had slowed, the process had to be worked after the disaster, right? It took the disaster victims of Hurricane Andrew longer than would have been expected to recover, but they did recover. By 2000, it took them 8 years, fully recovered, full repairs, made whole. Slow start, quick finish. The next disaster that occurred was the Northridge earthquake in the North County of Los Angeles, California. This earthquake dwarfed Andrew. Maybe it was just those California real estate values, but this was $50 billion worth of damage out in California. And it just occurred in 1994. And the reforms that the bipartisan members of Congress had passed to fix Hurricane Andrew worked like a charm. They worked. It was efficient. We were getting disaster assistance loans out. Community businesses were provided working capital loans to make sure they stayed in business until the communities could rebuild. People did not lose their jobs. California recovered. So you're talking about issuing out, let's see, I got the numbers here, $17 billion worth of disaster assistance in California. It took 2 years for the recovery to occur. 67% of the most severely damaged real estate was repaired and or replaced in 2 years. Yeah, Northridge earthquake, an amazing success story in American federal disaster relief. People were made whole. The next natural disaster that I want to talk about is Hurricane Katrina, 2005. Now, before we get to what happened in Katrina, because I think some of you remember how bad that was, there was a preceding event that kind of explains some of the difficulties that occurred. Okay, part of the reforms that Congress had made in dealing with Hurricane Andrew back in 93, okay, was that they had recommended, amongst other things, that FEMA be elevated. And President Clinton did elevate FEMA to a cabinet level position so that the president and the FEMA director had a direct line. So in a disaster relief situation, you need emergency management, you need the authority to move money, you need the authority to move assets. They cannot go through a bureaucracy. Okay. FEMA was cabinet level position from like 93 all the way up. Then George W. Bush took office January 20th, 2001. And one of the first things he did, go figure, is he demoted FEMA. He took them out of the cabinet and put them to a sub-cabinet role. Then all the oxygen in the room left the administration on disaster assistance because 9/11 occurs. Now we're dealing with the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history. The Bush administration has a problem on their hands. 3,000 Americans have been killed. We have a massive response effort going on. Lots of war drums beaten. They hate us for our freedoms. Yeah, all that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. One of the things that George W. Bush did was he created the Homeland Security Administration. Now, if you happen to be a fiscal conservative, a small government fiscal conservative, which was a major part of who voted for George W. Bush, the Texas governor, if you happen to be a small government fiscal conservative, the idea that our response to the intelligence failure that allowed 9/11 to occur. Because as we all came to learn, the intelligence agencies, of which there was like 11, 12, 13 of them, did not talk to each other. Their systems were not compatible. And therefore, you had the FBI knowing certain things about the terrorists getting trained on aircraft, and you had other agencies knowing certain things. And if they had put it all together, they could have stopped them, but they didn't since they didn't talk. If you are a small government conservative, you would think, okay, that is a classic example of why you need small, efficient government. If created the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil in U.S. history, the response would be, let's get back to efficiency. Let's start making some sense. But that's not exactly what George W. Bush did. He went the other direction. He said, you know what we need? More bureaucracy. And so he created the largest government agency, the Homeland Security Administration. And he buried all those intelligence agencies underneath Homeland Security. And where did he put FEMA? In the basement of the Homeland Security Administration. So you're not only not a cabinet level role, but you're now in the basement of the most massive, brand new, because no one knows where the bathroom is over there yet. They just got started. Brand new federal agency, Homeland Security Administration. Okay. By 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit, you had Mike Brown. His background was in disaster relief, right? No, no. He was training horses, Mike Brown. But apparently he donated some money to George W. Bush. But I digress. He was the FEMA director sitting in the basement of the Homeland Security Administration when the worst hurricane crushed Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, northern Florida. Okay. Absolutely catastrophic damage. We're talking $125 billion worth of damage, Hurricane Katrina. Oh my God. And what emerged in terms of disaster relief in Katrina? We went from rapid response, full recovery in 2 years in the Northridge earthquake. We went from slower but full recovery in 8 years in Hurricane Andrew to a complete failure in Hurricane Katrina. And let me just break down how Hurricane Katrina disturbed the people who were involved in that disaster. First and foremost, 53% of all disaster assistance applications were declined in Hurricane Katrina. 53%. All of these people are disaster victims. All of them lost most everything. Right? We saw the pictures. 53% got declined. There was hardly any recovery of rental properties. There was a 92 recovery rate for people who own homes. Yeah. But if you rented, almost no recovery. Personal property, rebuilding the rental properties, almost none. Catastrophic. Right. Okay. In terms of the population of New Orleans, this is ground zero to Katrina. 52% of the New Orleans population was no longer there during the recovery period. After Katrina, right, 250,000 New Orleans residents displaced. We created American refugees in Hurricane Katrina. We were sending people as far away as North Dakota, Minnesota, Washington State. Yes, they were in Texas and Houston and all that, but we sent them all over the United States. 250,000 people were displaced, including 100,000 African Americans who used to live in New Orleans. It was a catastrophic demographic displacement. That this is absolute failure for a federal disaster relief effort. Just complete failure. What was also true is the success rates were tied to political parties. So the governor of Louisiana was a Democrat, and the governor of Mississippi was a Republican, and the recoveries in Mississippi far exceeded, not even close to exceeded what happened in Louisiana. Catastrophic. Okay. First time that level of political bias had seeped into disaster relief. Okay, so that's Hurricane Katrina, 2005. Fast forward to 2023. You figure after that nightmare, we must have learned something. We have the wildfires hit Lahaina, Hawaii. 12,000 residents displaced. 89% of them are renters. Almost $6 billion worth of damage. 40% of the population is Filipino immigrants. 20% of the disaster victims are not American citizens, and because of that are ineligible for FEMA assistance. Yeah, so automatically 20% of the disaster victims can't get help from the federal government. Yeah, that's what we've become. We'll help you if you're an American. You're not an American? Well, sorry you lost everything. Now get out. Apparently. I mean, the rebuilds in Lahaina is de minimis beyond homeowners, which only represented, again, 89% of the people who displaced were renters. So, yeah, the few homes, yes, because of course those people have money too. That's where the rebuild rate is. But once again, replicating what happened in Katrina, the renters, the rental properties were not repaired. The personal property loss was not replaced, not to the extent that what happened with the homeowners and their personal property. Okay, so that's Lahaina, 2023. Then Hurricane Helene. All the trends of these natural disasters are being exacerbated by climate change, the climate crisis. That's another episode where we talked about that. Check it out. Okay, but Hurricane Helene did something that was just extraordinary. If you've never been to Asheville, North Carolina, beautiful community, by the way, we're talking about a community that's up in the mountains. Elevation is not at sea level. And we're not talking about 100 feet. I don't have the exact Asheville, North Carolina elevation, but I know it's in the mountains, a good ways up. No one would expect a mountain town at high elevation to ever have to flood. But here comes climate crisis. Asheville flooded. Horrible damage. Unbelievable damage. $53.6 billion worth of damage. Not just in Asheville, but across the state of North Carolina. Devastation because of Hurricane Helene. And so Joe Biden, we've already politicized federal disaster relief. Joe Biden is a Democrat. The governor of North Carolina happens to be a Democrat. Biden goes ahead and approves 100% federal participation in the disaster relief. The FEMA rules were 75% from the federal government, 25% from the states. Joe Biden, because of this unusual nature of the disaster and because it was a Democrat helping a Democrat, he got his Democratic Congress to vote for 100%. But that expired by May of 2025 when Donald Trump did what? Said, well, the Democrat did this. I'm a Republican. Screw that. And he turned down North Carolina, who was in the first year of their disaster relief recovery, turned them down for the 100% federal participation. So now the state of North Carolina has to scramble around in mid-disaster and come up with the 25% to continue the infrastructure, the personal property loss, the personal real estate loss, the business real estate loss. Yeah, billions, and like as it said, $53.6 billion worth of damage. Now the state of North Carolina has to come up with 25% of that to try to recover for their people. Political abandonment in the middle of a nationally declared natural disaster. If you look at the 5 federally declared natural disasters, one in 92, one in 94, one in 2005, and then 2023 and 2024. This gives you the history of things leading up to where we are in America today, which underlines breadcrumb number 3. America is a divided nation because power pits us against each other. This is homeowners versus renters in disaster relief. This is citizens versus non-citizens in Lahaina. This is Republicans versus Democrats in Asheville, North Carolina. This is rich versus everybody else. Okay? Yeah. This is why we are divided, because power has done this. This is how the government has done this. This is how the people who own the government have done this. But we were not always a divided nation. In 1994, as I discussed a bit earlier, Republican Governor Pete Wilson was the governor of California. And he worked well with Democratic President Bill Clinton. So when the Northridge earthquake was a declared natural disaster, there was hyper efficient and effective cooperation. And this is something I could speak to. You know what? Because I was just coming out of law school when the Northridge earthquake hit. And I volunteered. It was a paid position, but I signed up for a 1 year stint. It's like a military stint, but a 1 year contract to be a lead disaster assistance loan officer for FEMA's disaster assistance program, primarily for the Northridge earthquake. So let me just tell you, that job is 7 days a week. Yeah, you take some vacation where you have to, but otherwise it's 7 days a week. That's how you work. And you can make some decent money, but it wasn't about that. So I am acutely familiar with what the disaster relief program was like for the most successful disaster recovery in U.S. history, the Northridge earthquake. 2 years, 67% of the worst damaged real estate replaced and or repaired, raised and rebuilt. 2 years. Yeah. Yeah. As I said, just going over it, the FEMA component, the financing that I was participant in, $17 billion. Even Katrina, FEMA's component was 12.6 billion. Yeah, which is a dramatic decline from what was done 10 years earlier in the Northridge earthquake. But here's the thing. I'm going to give you a story, and it happened during my 1 year stint to give you an idea of how disaster assistance used to work in America. There was some flooding in southern Georgia. That was a declared natural disaster. Doesn't get the visibility that the Northridge earthquake did. I was assigned to help disaster victims for a couple of months for this flood in Georgia. And one of the disaster victims was a school teacher, was a couple, young couple. I don't remember their ages, but I know they were still in their 20s. They had just bought a house like 3 years earlier. This is southern Georgia, and the housing is modest compared to California. For their modest incomes, they were both school teachers. They took their life savings and they bought a house. So the house was only 3 years old. And the floods had destroyed the house, 60% damage, complete raise and rebuild. There's nothing you can do with that. Okay. Well, when I looked at their tri-merge credit report and I looked at their 3 years tax transcripts so I could see their income, the simple math was their mortgage payment, their existing mortgage payment was 50% of their take home pay. Well, the affordability standard for a mortgage, if you're going to get approved for a mortgage, is usually caps out at 40%. And they already at 50%. And here, what we're having to do is refinance that existing mortgage that's at 50% of their take home pay, raise the house, tear down the existing structure that's 60% damaged, flood damage and everything else. Cannot do anything with that rock. Tear that down, remove that, and rebuild the house of equal value. Now, how are they possibly going to afford that financing? Well, a couple of things. The disaster assistance program is at the government's cost. And so the prevailing mortgage rate at that time was 10%. 10%. We were offering 30-year fixed rate mortgages at 3.625% fixed for 30. Yeah. when the market is at 10%. That is what we were offering. And what that did, because the interest rate was so much lower, is it allowed us to take, so let's say this was a $100,000 house, right? And let's say they only had it for 3 years. So let's say they still had $90,000 on the house to refinance the $90,000 existing mortgage and rebuild the $100,000 house. So let's say another $100,000 now. So that's $190,000, right? In order to replace their house. Okay. By charging 3.625% instead of the 10% that was on the 90,000, you can get a payment for the $190,000 loan that matches their pre-existing payment. That is literally how you make someone whole, is that their payment is still going to be the same and their property is completely repaired. Okay. But I looked at this and I said, but hold it now. They were at 50% of their take home pay. And let me tell you, these people paid their bills. Their credit was great. So they were handling the 50%. Problem is that eventually the roof is going to go out and they need to replace it. The first time a speed bump happens, someone gets sick, someone's income goes down, whatever, school district is losing money and they're laying off, whatever, their cushion is going to go away and they're going to get into a default situation. That's why mortgage underwriting typically limits a mortgage to 40%. You need enough cushion when things happen to be able to continue to pay the mortgage. They didn't have that cushion. As a lead, I had a team working for me. I had the authority to approve exceptions to policy. So I decided, oh, I should mention, the wife was 9 months pregnant. Yeah, 9 months pregnant. So here, this young couple about to have their first child had lost everything. What I did was, instead of approving the $190,000 loan, restoring their 50% of take home pay, I approved the loan. I allowed the payment of that loan to be equal to 40% of their take home pay. I restored the standard affordability cap. So they actually were made better off. And it had to be an exception of policy. But the reason why I did it was not just to be nice. The reason why I did it is because it improves the chances that they will be able to pay the loan for the 30 years if they have the cushion to be able to handle any unexpected expenses that come up through home ownership. I was restoring that cushion. So it made underwriting sense, which is why I was able to approve the exception. But when I told the gentleman on the phone what I had done, that his mortgage payment, that his house was going to be replaced, that his personal property is going to be replaced, and that the total payment for everything all in was going to be less than his original mortgage payment to the point where it was only 40% of his take home pay, he started to cry. Then I started to cry. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to start crying right here. This is what we used to do for each other. This is what we're capable of doing for each other. This is when we were the United States of America. This is that school teachers, taxpayer dollars, helping them in the middle of a natural disaster. This is what FEMA was all about. This is what the Congress intended when they expanded and revised the program to fix what had happened in Hurricane Andrew. This is where we were. And yet, this is where we are now. So, yeah, breadcrumb number 4. This is who we were. We used to be the United States of America. We used to stand with each other through thick and thin. Yeah, we'd have good arguments. Yeah, we'd have fights. But don't let anyone get in between us. That's who we were. And that's who we can be again. How then do we make sense of this crazy world we're in now? How do we get back to what we were? Because that's the part of us that we're proud of. That's the part of us that we thought we were growing up into. That's the nation that honors the American tradition. The way you do that is you figure out how you got here. Is you apply the same basic logic for finding the keys. And we are empowered to do that more today than ever before. For every issue, every event that is affecting your life, go ahead and hear the explanations, the narratives provided by your preferred source of media. You have to get your news from somewhere. So go ahead, wherever you prefer to get your news from, listen to the explanation they give you explaining the event that's affecting your life. The war in Iran, the genocide in Gaza, whatever the issue is, if it's affecting your life, hear their explanation. Go get your AI bot, whichever your preferred AI bot is. Mine is Claude. Some people like ChatGPT. There's many of them out there. They are all accessible. Yes, even people who don't make much money can access AI. And what I want you to do is this: take the story, take the event that has occurred that's affecting your life. You take note of the narrative, the explanation that your chosen media is giving you. Then ask the AI to give you a summary of the historical events that led to this current event that's affecting your life. AI will, 2 minutes, will have a historical summary of the events that led to the explanation you were given for the particular event. Once you have that information, compare the history, now that you understand the history, to the explanation that was given to you. If it's true, you got a good source of media, but always check. If it's not, this is your trusted media intentionally lying to you. And I think you're going to find out that they are intentionally lying to you. And so that leads us to breadcrumb number 5. For any explanation given about events affecting your life, always verify whether they're true by using AI to summarize the historical events that led to the current event. We are empowered to do that. AI has access to all available public information, not just the stories out of the New York Times, but the actual history. Because history is recorded in many, many ways. Academia, all types of sources, stories, culture, expressions, the poems, songs. There are tons of expressions that record things as they happen, as they actually happen. And AI has access to all of it. So when you ask AI, could you give me a summary report on the historical events that led to the war in Iran, the current war in Iran? AI will do that for you. And a part of that information is going to be the long history of our relationship with Iran. And you're going to see some trends in there that are not explained by what the president is saying about why we're attacking Iran. That is how you figure out what the hell is going on. Okay? So do this. Make sure, very important, that you verify any explanation you're given for the events that are impacting your life. You want to know why you're getting laid off? And you look at CNBC and they're telling you some nonsense about it's artificial intelligence replacing your job or whatever. Go to your AI bot and ask. January had the highest number of layoffs since 2009. Could you give me the summary of the events that would explain why why job loss is so high? And see if it has anything to do with your job is getting replaced by AI. Sure, it's going to have something to do with that, but it ain't going to be the primary reason. And the data will show that. Okay, so this is what I'm saying to you. All right, this is the moment that I'm going to summarize 3 blatant lies that my trusted media and your trusted media have told us about events that are easily verifiably untrue. by AI, and we have access to it. The first one is Israel cannot be committing genocide in Gaza because they're merely responding to Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. It sounds plausible. And let's not get it twisted. That is the only justification that either Israel is saying or that Biden administration said while endorsing this activity. That is the prevailing narrative. And it's everywhere. What's the historical data that would drive the question as to whether Israel's committing genocide? Genocide is defined by the Genocide Convention. Yeah, a document that was written in 1947. As of today, over 150 nations have ratified the Genocide Convention, including the United States and including Israel. The United States ratified the Genocide Convention in 1988. Genocide is defined in the convention. According to the Genocide Convention, there is no legal justification for genocide. Let me repeat that. According to the Genocide Convention, which is only 4 pages long, there is no legal justification for genocide. Not murder, not attempted murder, or even attempted genocide. There is no exception. Genocide is the crime of crimes. And if you're committing it, there is no justification for it. So, on its face, the narrative that says that Israel cannot be committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza is a bold-faced lie when they say it's because they're only responding to how Hamas killed Israelis, 1,100 Israelis, and took 252 hostages on October 7th. It's because there is no justification. It's not saying that what Hamas did was right, and it's not even saying that Israel can't go after Hamas. Genocide does not involve Israel going after Hamas because Hamas attacked Israel. Genocide involves the indiscriminate murder of innocent civilians. In other words, you can go after the combatant, those who attacked you, but you have a burden to minimize the collateral damage on civilians. That's what the Genocide Convention requires. That's what the Geneva Conventions require, rules of war, that you minimize the impact on civilians. When Israel, it's indiscriminate. The tens of thousands of children, women, old people, non-combatant men, tens of thousands of them that they have killed in Gaza. They are using the largest munitions in close quarter urban combat, which is maximum concussive force, with no regard on the collateral damage. And this is what genocide is. But it's not just an opinion. On January 26, 2024, the presidential election year, the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court that rules on the issues of genocide according to the treaty that we ratified, had determined Israel had made a claim that South Africa's claim of genocide, that Israel was committing genocide, should be thrown out of court on a summary judgment because Israel cannot be committing genocide when they're only responding to Hamas's attack. The International Court of Justice not only rejected that argument, but ruled that South Africa had presented the threshold level of evidence that indicates that more likely than not, Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And that did not change the narrative one bit. That did not change Joe Biden's comments on it one bit. They did not retract the statement from Admiral Kirby, which said to the media in a press conference that the case that South Africa had against Israel in terms of the genocide in Gaza, the official spokesperson of the National Security Council said on behalf of Joe Biden that South Africa's case was baseless and without merit. Yeah, baseless. It had nothing. They didn't change that statement even when the High Court, by a vote of 15-2, 17 judges, including an American chief judge, voted 50 in favor of saying no. Not only is that argument not true, yet you can't be guilty of genocide if you're just defending yourself, but that the evidence indicates that in fact Israel is committing genocide. Okay, so that's a vivid example of how, in with the most extreme prejudice, the narrative is lying to you, lying to me. And when people are willing to lie to you that vigorously, you need to understand why and protect yourself against that. The next one is over this war in Iran. The explanation we're given is that Iran is intent on developing nuclear weapons, and that would threaten Israel. As a result, we have to destroy them. We have to stop their nuclear weapons program. Iran has been a signatory to the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty since the 1970s. A part of that treaty requires any nation that is developing uranium, which is used for nuclear weapons, to be subject to International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors who will come in and see how you are enriching your uranium. Because under the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, no nation is allowed to enrich the uranium to the 90% level that can be used in a nuclear weapon. But enrichment for nuclear power, like in a nuclear power generating facility, is far lower than weapons grade 90%. So, through June of 2025, Iran has always been subject to inspection by the International Atomic Energy Agency and has never been found to have enriched uranium anywhere near weapons grade. On top of the fact, under the Obama administration, Iran agreed to the Iranian nuclear deal, which was where they offered to give their uranium to Russia to enrich the uranium for nuclear power purposes only, and then receive that enriched uranium that would no longer be able to be used for a nuclear weapon back. They were abiding by all the inspections across the entire chain of custody of the materials by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And they were in full compliance. So, under the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, if you are a nation that generates nuclear power, such as Spain, and you are complying with the inspections, you're not enriching uranium, you're near weapons grade, your nuclear program is protected under the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. No one is allowed to attack it. But what did we do? We attacked it last year in June of 2025, blowing up nuclear facilities in Iran, and we have waged war against them again. So I cannot express this more. Iran has not tried to enrich uranium to weapons grade. And the way we know this is because we've been inspecting their uranium for decades. It even gets worse than that. The supreme leader that we assassinated in this war, yeah, that person, since 2005, over 11 years ago, the supreme leader of Iran, who's also their religious leader, declared that the use of nuclear weapons is haram, Haram, which under Islamic law, religious law, is forbidden under Islamic law. This is what he declared publicly. Now, he didn't write it in a fatwa, but he declared it as his fatwa verbally, and that was his policy. And Iran has never approached enriching uranium to weapons grade. In fact, the agreement that they made with the Obama administration limited their enrichment to less than 4%. 4% when it needs to be 90% in order to be weapons grade. And they were complying with that. So there is absolutely no legal justification for us attacking Iran. And yet, this is what's causing the global energy crisis because Iran is defending itself by shutting down the Straits of Hormuz. The third one is that Russia's attack on Ukraine in February 2022 was an unprovoked, naked aggression. This is what Joe Biden said to us. And that became the thing. And it was such a naked aggression that we got the world to agree to seize $300 billion in Russian US dollar reserves. We took $300 billion from them to try to destroy their central bank and destroy their economy over their naked aggression and attacking Ukraine. Okay. All right. If you go into your AI bot and said, what were the events that led to Russia's attack of Ukraine in 2022, you will see very clearly that there was nothing naked and there was nothing unprovoked about that aggression. The story, and not a long one, just a few bullet points, starts in 1991 with the Soviet Union standing down. Part of the agreement that Mikhail Gorbachev made with H.W. Bush early 90s was that, okay, if as the Soviet Union relinquishes their empire, which means releases control over East Germany and all the Eastern European countries that Russia was controlling, they were going to relinquish control of all of that. They made a deal with us. We asked them to support the reunification of Germany, East Germany joining West Germany, and that the reunified Germany join NATO. Okay, now let's understand the significance of that ask. This is absolute victory for America because it was Germany who killed between 20 and 27 million Soviets in World War II, including 8.7 million Red Army soldiers. So when the Soviet Union is agreeing that Germany can come back together as the Greater Germany again and can be part of NATO, which is designed to be an enemy of the Soviet Union, the defense treaty to oppose the Soviet Union, this was a big ask. This wasn't like you got a cup of milk to borrow. Gorbachev said, okay, I get it. We lost the Cold War. To the winner goes the spoils. We will support the reunification of Germany and as a member of NATO. But we would like your assurance that NATO will not expand east of Germany to absorb the rest of the buffer states that the Soviet Union had held on to since World War II. Okay, that was the ask. And James Baker, Secretary of State for H.W. Bush, gave Mikhail Gorbachev and the Soviet leadership a private assurance that America would not move 1 inch east of Germany, much to the chagrin of Russia, who was the surviving country after the Soviet Union dissolved. We have acted as if that private assurance was worth nothing because we didn't formalize it in a written agreement, as if private assurances don't have significant weight in Soviet American relations. I have to go back to another piece of history that helps us to understand how untrue that is. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Yes, the greatest threat to nuclear war during the Cold War was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred in October 1962, when the United States discovered that the Soviet Union had put nuclear missiles in Cuba. When we discovered that the Soviet Union was putting nuclear missiles in Cuba 30 minutes from the coast of Florida, we engaged in an international incident that was going to lead to World War III. We were going to blockade Cuba and we were going to attack and kill those people who were putting nuclear weapons on Cuba. And the way we resolved that conflict was publicly the Soviet Union, Khrushchev, agreed that he would remove the nuclear missiles out of Cuba. And publicly, the United States agreed that we would no longer try to overthrow Fidel Castro because we were trying to overthrow Fidel Castro. Remember the Bay of Pigs. And so that was the public agreement. But privately, President Kennedy gave Khrushchev a private assurance. So this was secret. And he said, if you agree to do this in this way, where you basically are agreeing to stand down publicly, we will privately remove the nuclear missiles that we put in Turkey. Oh, the rest of the story. The reason why the Soviet Union felt empowered to put nuclear missiles in Cuba is because in 1961, the United States put nuclear missiles in Turkey that was in range of Moscow. Yeah, we started this thing. So we didn't want to lose face that we had started the incident by putting nuclear missiles in Turkey. So we did it with a private assurance. And Khrushchev trusted Kennedy. He put it in his autobiography. He trusted Kennedy. And because he trusted Kennedy, he agreed to take the black eye, to take the public relations. The Soviet Union stood down when America was going to threaten nuclear war, and they agreed to pull their missiles. And we honored that deal. We did remove the nuclear missiles from Turkey. Okay, so fast forward to 1991 when we have this huge ask of Mikhail Gorbachev, and we're saying, hey, listen, yeah, can you agree to the reunification of Germany, the people who killed 20 million Soviets? Yeah, could you agree to that as a member of NATO? He said, okay, I'll do that. I'll swallow hard. I'll do that. But I need your private assurance that you won't expand NATO east of Germany. And when we gave it to them, yes, they had every reason to believe that we would honor it. Why? Because we honored it at the height of the Cold War. Now that the Cold War is over, why wouldn't we honor it? And we didn't. Following that incident, in 2008, George W. Bush announced to the world, ask your AI bot, at the NATO summit in the spring of 2008, George W. Bush announced to the world NATO's intention to expand to include Ukraine in NATO. Okay. When he announced that to the world, Vladimir Putin, who was running Russia then, he came into power in Russia in 2000. He contacted the U.S. ambassador, Burns. He was the U.S. ambassador in Moscow to Russia. And he told him the entire political class of Russia considers NATO expansion to include Ukraine, that's all the way to the Russian border, to be an existential threat to the national security of Russia, at which point they will respond in the most severe terms. Everything is on the table, including nuclear war. Putin communicated that to the US ambassador, and the US ambassador wrote a memo famously called Niet means Niet. Go ahead and Google it. And that memo, which was released years later by WikiLeaks, because these are all secret memos, that memo was to George W. Bush. And basically it told him, it said, listen, this is Russia's ultimate red line. This is the one where they empty the barrels, because this is the red line. You cannot move NATO to the Russian border. After you gave the private assurance, you wouldn't move east of Germany. Now you're moving all the way to the Russian border. This is where they draw the line. Okay, so we knew in 2008 that they would go to nuclear war if necessary to prevent NATO from expanding to their border. And what is the next event? Under Obama. Obama's Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland. Go out on YouTube and put Victoria Nuland, Ukraine, your secret tape, and go listen for yourself. The Russians recorded Victoria Nuland talking to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine in February of 2014, where she was informing the U.S. ambassador, like they were at the country club somewhere, right, who the United States were going to put in power to run Ukraine after the overthrow of the democratically elected Ukrainian government, because that current government was not in support of joining NATO. They were not anti Russian. Ukraine was actually getting along very well, both economically and politically, with Russia. We don't have to get into the cultural ties, but this huge cultural overlap between Ukraine and Russia. The public had elected a government that was not interested in joining NATO, that was not interested in making Russia their enemy. And we were going to overthrow it. And here was the Assistant Secretary of State in charge of Eastern Europe telling the U.S. ambassador, this is our plan. These are the people we're going to put in as soon as the overthrow occurs. And later that month, in February 2014, the violent overthrow occurred. And triangulation, Jeffrey Sachs, one of the leading developmental economists in global history, was called into Ukraine after the overthrow occurred to help the Ukrainians disentangle their economy from Russia. He was called in. And when he hit the ground in Ukraine, he was told that the United States had paid for the violent overthrow of that democratically elected government. He was so offended by that reality that he would not participate in helping the new Ukrainian government that we put in. Go check out Jeffrey Sachs. Yeah, he's not just a fly on the wall. He is one of the principal contributors to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, one of the most important pieces of economic development policy in the world. My point being is this is the events that led to Russia attacking Ukraine. But there's one more. In December of 2021, with the Russian military on the Ukrainian border, Vladimir Putin sends a communique to the NATO Secretary General and says, can we have a security summit on the question of Ukraine joining NATO? And the NATO Secretary General, speaking on behalf of the United States, in a secret communique that ultimately he publicly acknowledged, and you can Google it, his message back to Vladimir Putin with the Russian military on Ukraine's border, NATO expansion, even to the Russian border, is not the business of Russia. So we go from giving the private assurance that carried international weight with the Soviets, that they had every reason to believe it because we honored it in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We go from that promise to telling them that now that we're coming to their border, that it is not their business if we come to their border. Yeah, that's the rest of the story. So that's the historical facts that led to Russia attacking Ukraine. This is an example of a lie that is diametrically opposed to the truth. That is absolute. This is what it is. Russia's attack was because NATO was threatening their national security. They told us about this in 2008. They made this a condition of agreeing to German reunification in 1991. The Soviet Union demonstrated the need for a security buffer by creating the Warsaw Pact after World War II and holding on to Eastern Germany. This was all the reasons why it was an existential threat to the national security of Russia to expand NATO to their border. Cannot get further from the narrative. The narrative is that much of a lie. And so you have to ask yourself, if our trusted news sources can lie to us that blatantly, what does that mean? Well, it means that their interests and our interests do not align, which leads us to breadcrumbs number 6. We cannot reclaim our personal sovereignty as individuals if we do not know the truth about the events affecting our lives. Let me repeat that. We cannot reclaim our sovereignty as individuals if we do not know the truth about the events that are affecting our lives. The good news is we now can know the truth. Because no matter what they tell us, no matter how blatant the lie is, we can always go into the AI, who has access to all public available information, and get a summary report for what are the facts, what is the historical events that led to the current event, and see if the historical event supports the explanation we're given. What you will find, as I have laid out in these 3 very blatant ones, it doesn't. that they're lying to us intentionally. And so this is why we don't understand. This is why everything doesn't make sense. This is how we wound up in a nation where we're fighting each other while all the benefits of all our productivity go to the top. Yeah. But by knowing the truth, we can find out who we can trust. And that leads me to breadcrumbs number 7. Who benefits from the toxic vitriol degrading our communities, degrading our economics, degrading our politics, degrading our society? Who is benefiting? Well, all you got to do is look at some of these events. Who is benefiting from the genocide in Gaza? Only the people who own the weapons manufacturers who are killing all those innocent Palestinians. That's who. Money. It is only extreme wealth who's benefiting from each of these incidences, who's benefiting from the war in Ukraine, who's benefiting from this war in Iran, who benefited from 9/11, benefited from the war on terror, who benefited from 20 years of war in Afghanistan. The only people who benefit, not the soldiers, not the victims, not their families, not the people we liberated. No, the only people who benefited was extreme wealth. And that leads us to breadcrumb number 8. The true divide in America is the 1%. And it's not even most of the 1%. It's the 0.1%, the 0.01%, and so forth. But for the sake of simplicity, we will say the true divide in America is the 1% extreme wealth versus the 99%. Because none of us in the 99% are benefiting from this. Only they are. And which leads me to a famous statement by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. I'll add that. We must learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish as together as fools. This is where we are. If your life is increasingly becoming a nightmare, it's because we are perishing together as fools. We have been told a bunch of lies that convinces us to hate the people who are not harming us on behalf of the people who are harming us. That is what being a fool is. But we are empowered to find out the truth, to use AI to find out the truth, to use AI to check the history, to make sure that the explanations we're giving for the events that are affecting our lives are actually true. And by finding out that they're blatant lies, we now know this is power trying to pit you against me so that they can steal everything while we fight. Well, that game is over, and it stops right here on Breadcrumbs. This is Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for your ongoing participation. I really want you to put your comments in the notes. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what resonates. Let me know what doesn't resonate. Let me know how you're going to empower yourself to understand the truth about the events that are affecting your life so that we can stop this food fight between me and you and gather together and reclaim our country, our sovereignty, our lives. But before we end, I have an announcement. And that announcement is we are launching a new Breadcrumbs weekly newsletter. And in this newsletter, you're going to get the latest update of the recent conversations we've had, key breadcrumbs that I drop here and there for you, all types of opportunities to get some gear or some free gifts, and what is happening in our community that's affecting our lives. I'm going to put a link to the notes of this episode. Please go there, Sign up for the weekly newsletter. It's free. And as you are gaining value from the podcast, I ask you to join our Patreon's Breadcrumbs community. The link will be in the notes here. The standard membership is $10 a month. And for that membership, you're going to get some really good free gifts. You're going to get expanded direct email access to me so that you can give me your feedback, so we can talk about issues, so we can really come into community with each other. And further, so that you have the opportunity to say, hey, why don't we talk about this particular issue that's affecting me in my life? And then we'll go down that journey path. And maybe you will come on the podcast and we'll have that discussion for a future episode. All that increased access comes from you joining the Patreon Breadcrumbs community as a standard member. There are other levels of membership because we want everyone to be able to join the community. So we're offering partial scholarships and full scholarships of the standard membership for people who can't afford to pay the $10 a month. And that's why we have higher tiers, like a pay it forward tier, which is $20 a month, because that additional amount helps to subsidize and support people who can't afford the $10 a month. I will support them, and hopefully some of you will support them. And then there's the founding members, people who really see the value in what we're doing and have enough resource that they can support the podcast at a higher level. That's a $50 a month. And each higher level of membership gets better gifts, valuable gifts, and ultimately signed autograph gifts. And to encourage more of you to become pay it forward members or become founding members, I'm offering a new expanded gift. And that is for the next 10 Pay It Forward members, I'm going to offer a 10-minute recorded interview where we will have a discussion for 10 minutes. And that will be part of a special community feedback episode of Breadcrumbs that ultimately I hope to do once a quarter. For the founding members, I'm offering a 30-minute interview and where we will have a special founding members episode where those interviews will play. It is actually the first 5 founding members. Both the links for the newsletter to sign up and to join the Breadcrumbs Patreon community will be in the notes. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for participating in our community. We are building something special here. This was an important conversation. You take care, and I will see you next time in the conversation.